Hello, everybody. So I just got through watching the 4 hour long Snyder Cut of Justice League, and I have a lot to say about it. First of all, there's something about this film that I thought was really interesting that I noticed before I even saw it. That was kind of the diverging viewpoints about this film between ordinary people and DC Comics fans and the critics. It seemed like ordinary people and DC fans they love this film, and they made their love for this film known, especially on social media. The critics pretty much said that yes, this film was better than the original, but that it still had all the problems that the original also had. So, who was correct? Was it the fans or the critics? I think the answer is probably somewhere in between, to be honest. First, let me say that I really like this movie. But before I go into what I liked about it, I'd like to kind of talk about what this film did wrong first. First, let me say, I think this film was pretty visually unpleasing, to say the least. I understand that Snyder was going for a much darker tone than Whedon, but dark films can be beautiful and visually pleasing as well. Look at films like Dark Knight or Taxi Driver, which are beautifully shot. Dark doesn't have to mean ugly. Instead of focusing on the cinematography and improving the visual storytelling in this film, it feels like Snyder just said screw it and kind of crammed in as many slow mo shots as possible. There was no attempt to really use practical effects in this film. Now, I understand that with a film of this nature, a lot of it has to be filmed in front of a green screen, but I felt like every scene in this film was, for the most part, it felt like it was almost like a cartoon or a video game, and not necessarily didn't necessarily feel like a live action film. I first noticed this in the scene where Wonder Woman was freeing the hostages. The fight looked kind of silly, and there was no real choreography or choreographed fighting or anything like that. So the film really didn't improve much in this regard. Next, there were still some issues with the plot. Even though they included Darkseid in this film, and Steppenwolf was just kind of the middleman, it still felt like just kind of a generic superhero movie plot. Bad guy wants to take over the world because he's bad, and he needs to either build a weapon or find a weapon to enable him to do this. In this case, the mother boxes, and the heroes need to stop him. This really didn't change much from the original. Maybe if Darkseid comes back in the future, they will try to develop his character more and maybe make us understand why he's doing what he's doing, like they did with Thanos in the MCU. But there was none of that here. Just kind of a generic bad guy wants to take over the world plot. And I think that thematically, this I don't think it was a major improvement over the Whedon cut. To compare it to Marvel for a moment, just about every film in the MCU has either a different societal theme or political issue that it serves as an allegory for, like NSA surveillance in The Winter Soldier, or US foreign policy in the Middle East in the original Iron Man. It mostly feels like this film wasn't made because it had something to say, but because Warner Brothers just needed a Justice League film. Okay, now that I got that out of the way, I'd, I'd like to tell you what it is that I like about this film, and there's a lot that I did like. The darker style made it less goofy and cartoonish than the Whedon cut, and more consistent, I would add. Even though the villain plotline was generic and didn't improve much from the original version, where this version did improve the most was with the heroes. We especially saw that with Cyborg, who had no backstory in the original. And in this, we got to see him struggle to come to terms with what happened to him and forgive his father. These scenes give this film a certain level of depth that was not in the original. With the Flash, who pretty much was a caricature in the original film, felt more like a real person. He was still goofy, which I liked, and I thought fit this character well. But Snyder knew how to properly mix the correct amount of humor into this film without making it feel unbalanced. And due to the longer length, we got to see a lot more of the heroes and their character developments. This made us care for these characters more, and it made it feel like there was real stakes in this film. Like, we actually got to see Aquaman in the water and deal with the Atlanteans in this film. In the original, Aquaman had no underwater scenes, so his character felt completely wasted. Next, there was Superman. One of the biggest improvements in this film was that a quarter of his face wasn't CGI. This alone was a major improvement from the original Justice League. But Justice League had to essentially undo an error that both Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman made. That was, they completely didn't understand the character of Superman. He's supposed to be a symbol of hope, truth, justice, the American way, all that stuff. But those films, they were almost embarrassed by the character, it seemed like. And they thought that his backstory was almost stupid and childish. I understand why they might want to make the character a little darker in the DCEU, but they could have worked with a darker theme or tone and still had Superman be the symbol of hope in that darker universe. But so essentially both Whedon and Snyder attempted to correct this in these films, but I would argue that Snyder did it much better because he did it much more subtly. The original Whedon version tried to show how much the world was missing Superman after he died, but it really didn't work because in Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman, pretty much half the world just feared Superman, and he wasn't really a symbol of hope. And now they're acting like everyone loved him the second he died. It was just too inconsistent for me. In the Snyder version, we do see that the world misses Superman and builds memorials for him and things like that, but it doesn't act like everyone loved him from the start. It was much more subtle about it. In the Whedon version, it's like everyone's attitude about Superman turned on a dime within the course of this one film. It didn't work. They really showed that it took time in this Snyder version for people to kind of be okay with Superman and not fear him. So I thought it was just much more consistent in that regard. All in all, I'm happy that this version got released. I really loved it. I thought it was a major, major improvement over the original, but it just wasn't perfect. But this is definitely by far, I think, the best film I've ever seen made by Zack Snyder. So, thanks for listening, everybody. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe.